Hey, so this is me, Chris Kowalczyk. I believe this is episode 5 of my podcast. It's just been a little project of mine I've been thinking about for about 10 years. So let me just do a quick intro. This podcast is originally, or I guess mainly intended for people who actually know me directly, my current and former students. So I'm an ESL instructor teaching English, as a second language to immigrants. And I also taught in Japan for a long time as well, and that's English as a foreign language because, English is not generally spoken in Japan. There's a bit of a difference between ESL and EFL, but I won't get into that here. I've been teaching since 2007, so as of this moment, I have about 17 years of experience. I started out teaching just as a way to get an easy job in Japan because, in Asia, a lot of native English speakers get jobs. They start out as English teachers. Sometimes they go back to their home country pretty quickly, 1 or 2 years. And then sometimes that leads to a career in English teaching, or they might do something else. But pretty quickly, within a few months, I really liked it. I realized that I wanted to continue doing that. So then I went back to the U.S. About 6 months later, enrolled in a graduate school program. And then I went back to Japan, and then I taught there for about almost 5 years. And I say in total, I've lived abroad in Japan about 6 years or so. My mom's actually from Japan, so I didn't grow up speaking a lot of Japanese, but I did go to Japan every summer. And then as I got older, maybe in 11th grade, so I was about 16, I started to develop a renewed interest in studying Japanese and then living there. So kind of to summarize, I have a lot of experience learning a second language. For me, it's not a second language exactly, but, I didn't really speak it a lot. So I would consider it almost a second language. And then I also lived abroad for a long time. So I try to use that experience, knowledge, my opinions, and then connect with the students that way. So let me get to today's topic, which is using media for, I would say, improving your listening proficiency, right? By media, I mean music, podcasts, radio, movies, TV shows, things like that. Now, it's kind of similar to what I did in the last episode, where I'm trying to encourage students to kind of separate spoken English from the written language, because most people tend to focus on the text, the written language as their primary source of input. And, that's great. We do a lot of reading, but in real life, but I mean, what most students, and they say this, they actually need is to be able to understand spoken English, and of course to also speak and to be able to express themselves orally. But a lot of people just don't really improve much in that area, and I think a lot of it's also because it's uncomfortable. It's not so structured. It's difficult, So I thought I'd give some of my observations, reflections, just my opinions on this topic for myself as a language learner. I don't really study Japanese anymore, but I'm actually I'm trying to review a little bit. I'm going to be going to Japan in about 5 months from now. So I'm trying to review some stuff. I've been watching some Japanese TV on YouTube and, reading some books. But anyway. So my main thing is make sure that you're interested in whatever you're using to learn. So I recommended to a student once, I asked them, hey, what are you interested in? Could be anything. And he mentioned soccer. That's great, So I said, hey, you know what? Watch soccer, but watch it in English with the English commentary. Okay, that's great. So when you're watching the game, you're enjoying the game, you're going to watch the game anyway. It's not homework. It's not practice, right? However, when they're commentating on the game, it's going to be in English, right? So that's a great thing to do. But, how much soccer are you going to watch, right? How much TV can you watch in your day as an adult with kids, especially, right? So I recommended podcasts. People listen to podcasts all the time while they're driving, while they're cooking, cleaning, sometimes before going to bed. I use podcasts a lot. When I'm before bed, or if I wake up in the middle of the night and I want to get back to sleep. For some reason, I don't really listen to music anymore in bed. I used to. I feel like the podcasts, for whatever reason, kind of actually help me get back to sleep. Maybe because I'm focusing on a topic and not thinking about whatever's bothering me. I think when there's music, I'm still kind of thinking, I still have my thoughts running through my mind. So I recommended him to find some soccer podcasts on online, and you can find so many. You can find podcasts about anything, right? And the great thing is these days, podcasts, the technology is always improving, right? And the accessibility. So you can get transcripts of the podcast. Often you can get transcripts when you download those episodes or when you open those episodes. So that's great too. And you can also slow down the playback speed. So I always recommend doing it at a 3/4 speed or 0.75 speed. And that's really useful for a lot of people as well. That wasn't available when I started doing that. So I've been listening to podcasts since about 2008. And I also, of course, I was listening to English programs, but I was also listening to Japanese things. Primarily, when I was starting out, I was listening to these this comedy team called Banana Man or Banana Man. And I would just listen to them. I think I mentioned this in the previous podcast. I would just listen to them. They basically just talk about anything. They have their own comedy shows, which are very structured and scripted and so on. They rehearse. But for their podcast, it's very unstructured. They just have some general topics. And so their conversations sound actually very natural. And I'm going to touch on that a little bit later, but I just wanted to tell you what some of the things I did. I think maybe fast forward a couple years to 2010, 2011, when I was back in Japan. I was also listening to news in Japanese on the podcasts, and I would also watch Japanese TV, news, and other programs. And often I would leave it on while I was cooking or cleaning or exercising in my apartment, things like that. But I would also listen while I was walking outside or on the train. And the great thing these days is you can actually listen to YouTube videos while you're driving or while you're walking around. You might need the premium version for that, but that's a whole nother thing. So it wasn't as the technology or it wasn't as convenient, I would say, back then for me. But yeah, I did it. It was great. Walking my dog, that could take 45 minutes, and I just listened to the podcast in Japanese. So, and of course, these were things I was interested in: politics, news, comedy, whatever. So make sure you're interested in, okay? I tell my students this as well. I would just be honest. I would watch a lot of TV programs or movies with female celebrities that I really liked. And whatever it takes to get you watching in English or whatever, if you like a certain actress or an actor, you like George Clooney, you like Denzel Washington, you like Jennifer Lopez, whatever, you can watch all of their stuff. Watch their interviews on YouTube. Listen to their interviews on podcasts. You can find interviews with all kinds of celebrities, not just on YouTube or TV, but also podcast interviews. Whatever is going to get you engaged in that language, whether it's English or Japanese or whatever, you can find anything that you're interested in. And like I said, a celebrity or an actor or an athlete that you're interested, if that's going to get you listening, then just go for it, okay? I mentioned to my class the other day, my in-person job, but there was this Japanese celebrity. I don't know if you'd call her an actress. I think they're what you call a geinojin or something. Maybe she was a model. She started out as a model, but she was very funny, actually. She is humorous. Of course, she was very cute, but she wasn't just a pretty face. She had good comedic timing, and so she would be on TV shows where they would have comedy skits. She would make appearances on game shows, very funny, but also, I thought she was very cute. Her name was Kato Rosa, or Rosa Kato. She's actually Italian and Japanese, and I would watch all of her stuff. You know what? It was in Japanese. I was learning a lot. That's all that matters. And a lot of it was listening as well. So let me get on to next, how I used to use these. And these are just my recommendations. You can use them any way that you want when you're using media to improve your English proficiency, your listening proficiency. So what I used to do with TV shows, especially TV shows and movies and in Japanese, it could even be a game show or a comedy show or whatever, right? or podcast as well. But what I used to do is the first time I would just enjoy it from beginning to end. I would watch it without worrying too much about like, oh, I don't understand this part or I don't know that word. I would just kind of enjoy it. And that's why you have to be interested in what you're watching or listening to. So it didn't feel like work at all. I was having such a good time watching or listening to whatever. So you just enjoy it. And then maybe the next day or on the weekend or whatever, you go back and you really focus on certain parts, or you can focus on everything. But you have your dictionary, you have your notebook, you pause, you go back. What did he say? What did she say? I don't understand that. You try to understand it. You take notes. You use your dictionary or your translator or whatever. Okay? You gotta take notes. Why? So that you can review them later. Okay, this is a big thing I always push on students. Where is your notebook? Why are you not writing things down? You need to review every day. Everybody has a few minutes every day. Now, I took the train in Tokyo all the time. Of course, most people in Tokyo do not drive. So I had the opportunity. I'd always review while I was on the train, even just 5 minutes. Even when I was in the United States, when I was at work, I would have flashcards, and I would take the flashcards out when I was at work, and I would review my Japanese for 5 or 10 minutes or whatever, right? Everybody has an opportunity to review at least once a day. You gotta have your notebook. You gotta review, okay? So I would say that's the second time. And the second time you watch or listen to something, go into detail. Now, maybe you don't do the entire TV show episode or the whole movie. That might take too much time. But I want you to go back, okay? At least look at certain parts and write notes and use your dictionary or translator. You can always ask your teacher, right? I'm talking mostly to my own students. You can always ask your teacher, I didn't understand this. What did he or she say? I used to do that with my own Japanese teachers, Japanese school teachers. I learned Japanese here in the U.S. in college for a little bit, and then I also studied Japanese for a little bit in Japan. And I would always ask my teachers, hey, I read this or I saw this or something. Can you explain it? I don't really understand it. I couldn't catch it when I was listening. My Japanese friends, I also had a Japanese girlfriend, which is a different story, but you just ask them. Ask people, okay? Ask your neighbors. Ask your classmates even. Maybe they know. Whatever it takes, okay? Now, maybe a few days later or a week or two later, you go back third time to that TV show episode or the third time for that podcast. You listen to it or you watch it again, but now you should understand everything because you already analyzed it and you took notes. So the third time you use that, again, just enjoy it, but you'll be surprised at how much more you understand because you actually checked everything, right? You checked all the vocabulary. Now, you cannot do this for everything that you watch or listen to. You can't do it all the time, okay? You got to pick and choose maybe what things are most interesting to you or something that you really have a hard time understanding. Then you might want to stop and analyze it. Maybe you only check 5 or 10 minutes of that show or movie. That's okay too. The point is that you are taking notes, that you are analyzing, that you are stopping and trying to understand at least certain parts, if not everything. All right. Now, I think, and I'm going to talk about getting out of your comfort zone, okay? A lot of students say, I watch TV, I listen to whatever, I listen to the radio, I don't understand everything. It's too fast. Okay. First of all, I said that you can always slow down podcasts, all right, and YouTube videos, you can slow it down. But the thing is, you cannot understand everything 100%. Okay, when I'm listening to something, most of the stuff I can't even remember, 10 seconds later. You're not going to understand everything. That's not normal as a language learner, okay? But you're going to understand more and more each time if you just keep doing it. You got to get out of your comfort zone, okay? You have to relax, okay? Do not put the pressure on yourself to understand everything. What I used to do is I would listen to things, again, Japanese podcasts or radio or TV, and if I didn't understand something, I would just not care. I would just keep cleaning or cooking, but the idea was to always have a lot of this so-called Japanese listening, in your case, English listening, just to always have that all day, not all day, but maybe a few hours a day. You're driving home from work, you put on the radio for an hour, you're just going to be hearing that English the whole time. You're not going to understand everything. You might not even be paying attention sometimes because you're driving, because you're cooking, because you're cleaning, because you're walking your dog, whatever. But it's just there. You're constantly getting that information in English, or in my case, in Japanese. Trust me, you're going to understand more and more, little by little, maybe week by week or month by month, but you got to do it consistently. And you can't just do 10 minutes of listening practice every day like they have in the textbook, okay? The textbook says, here's a listening practice. It's maybe 3 minutes. You listen 2 or 3 times. There's your practice for the day. No. You got to have it going throughout the day, okay? It has to become a habit. English or learning Japanese or whatever, that has to be part of your daily routine, your habits. You got to watch the English news instead of Korean or Spanish or whatever. You got to do that every day. You got to be reading things in English, whatever, right? It sounds a little bit strict. I'm sorry, it sounds a little bit intense, but these are things that you just have to do. There's really no secret to that. The people who come to the United States and their English improves a lot, especially speaking and listening, it's usually because they're using that all day, whether it's at work or they're a student. Well, that's a whole different thing. But usually it comes down to work. You know that when people work in an environment where English is mostly spoken, so it could be at an office, it could be, I don't know, but their English gets a lot better, right? At least spoken and listening and speaking, right? When people work in the United States, but they're working maybe at a restaurant and all of their coworkers speak Korean or all of their coworkers speak Chinese or Spanish, we know that they really don't improve much, or they stop improving in their English listening and speaking. So you got to make sure that English is part of your day, right? And that includes watching things in English, listening to things, radio, whatever, okay? So it sounds a little bit intense, but that's what you got to do. You got to create this English language environment. Even if you speak Chinese at home with your husband or your wife or your kids and your coworkers only speak Chinese, I don't know, whatever, right? You can do what you can. You got to do what you can to create an English language environment for listening. Okay, you can do it. The question is, are you willing to do it? Are you willing to get out of your comfort zone? Are you willing to make that extra effort? But when you're interested, like I said, when you're interested in that topic, when you're interested in that actor, when you're interested in that sport, it will not feel difficult. I guarantee it. Okay. I'm going to tell you what, I do not like textbooks as a Japanese learner. I shouldn't say I hate textbooks, but the listening practice in the textbooks when I was a student, yeah, it's helpful, but what is it? 2 or 3 minutes, right? Boring. It's not relevant. It's not connected really to anything in my life. I have basically zero interest, okay? When I started watching movies and TV shows and listening to radio programs, watching comedy shows, my God, this is so interested, right? If I have to sit down and when I was, 20 years ago when I was studying Japanese, when I had to sit down and put in a CD and listen to it, my God, I was so bored, all right? Now, that may not be you, but I think most people would agree with that. Okay, so I kind of gave you my suggestions already. Now, here's something interesting that some people haven't really thought about is how are they talking? For example, if it's a TV show or a movie, that's scripted, right? So it's not quite how people speak in real life. It's more focused. It's a script, so there's a tight story. They're not saying and the and they're not going back in the conversation. It's scripted. Okay, so it's great, but it's not really how people talk, right? Now, when you listen to podcasts or radio programs or, interviews and things like that, there are different levels of, I would say, preparation or scriptedness. So the guys that I listen to, Banana Man, their podcast is basically, I would say it's basically unscripted. So their conversations on that podcast, it sounded pretty much like a real conversation to me. Kind of unfocused, going in different directions, going back into the conversation, pausing, a lot of that kind of stuff, right? I think that's great, and I think you should find something that is like that too. There are a lot of podcasts that are very not scripted, maybe not scripted exactly, but rehearsed, edited. The answers don't quite sound like a real conversation because there's a lot of preparation, there's a lot of notes. They try to stay focused, things like that. So that's something to also consider when you're looking for podcasts or radio programs is how much do these people prepare? How unscripted is it? How, I would say, loose or free are their conversations? Personally, when I listen to English podcasts, which I still listen to a lot, I actually don't like podcasts that feel too rehearsed or where I feel like they're practicing too much. It doesn't feel real to me, and I actually lose interest. So just for me, when I'm listening to English podcasts, I prefer ones that are actually more, I don't mean completely random either, but where I feel like it's more closer to a natural conversation. And that leads me actually to the final topic, which is audiobooks. I can't believe I forgot to mention this. Now, audiobooks are great, and I think I mentioned this in the last podcast. Audiobooks are great because, maybe you don't have time to read something, or maybe you're reading something and you want to listen to the pronunciation as well. And I think using audiobooks with the physical book or digital book, I think if you use those in tandem together, I think that's awesome. But again, audiobooks are literally scripted, right? Because the words are there and the narrator is just reading what's on the page. So audiobooks are great, but they are very scripted. So again, it's not quite a natural conversation. They're going to be speaking more clearly, and generally they're going to have a very generic or standard accent, okay? Whereas when you get these conversations and interviews, people are going to have their different ways of speaking. Again, you're going to get a much greater variety of pronunciation and accents, and it's going to feel messy and chaotic, which is what real conversations are. They're not scripted, right? So I hope all of those things kind of help you. Again, going back to what I used to do, unfortunately, I mentioned this in the last podcast, but unfortunately, when I was studying Japanese, I didn't do audiobooks. There weren't really any digital audiobooks when I started studying Japanese. You had to get like a tape or a CD, and I just didn't even think about it. And even when you get the CDs, I mean, it could be like 20 or 30 CDs, so it's not convenient, right? I mean, I guess you could have a CD player with you when you're walking around or in your car, but it's just so much more convenient today. So I do recommend audiobooks. You just have like 50 hours on your phone. It's amazing, right? So that's something I wish I had used, but again, audiobooks are also very scripted, so it's not quite natural. So I'm really glad that I chose to go with podcasts. News broadcasts were great on listening on the podcast, but again, highly scripted, not natural at all. So just make sure you find something you're interested in, okay? Anything else from my experience in Japan? Again, I think one of the keys is not to worry if you don't understand everything. Like I said, even when I was listening to podcasts in Japanese, a lot of the times I wasn't paying 100% attention. I was doing something else. But I think just having that constant immersion, constantly hearing Japanese spoken when I was in my apartment and so on, I think that really helped. And I should mention that when I was working in Japan, I was working as an English teacher, of course. So I'm using English almost all day at work. The staff at the university, the staff in our department anyway, basically spoke English because they have to, because they had like 60 or 70 teachers who's native English speakers, and I would say the majority of those teachers did not speak Japanese very well, and that's okay. I'm not judging them, but that's just the nature of working at an English language school or university. Is the staff is basically all going to speak English as well, the Japanese staff. So I basically didn't use Japanese at work, maybe just with the custodians or the people serving food, lunch. So maybe the security guard, right? So that's another thing. So for me, even working in Japan, I sometimes didn't really feel like I was in Japan. And I know a lot of my listeners, my students always mention this, is that a lot of times they don't feel like they're in the U.S. because they hardly hear English because of their work situation or their living or family situation, right? Which I totally understand. For me, it was kind of similar because I did have a Japanese girlfriend for about a year, but I also had another girlfriend who actually is Japanese, but she grew up mostly in the United States, so we only spoke English with each other. Then I had a Japanese girlfriend who actually spoke English, but she was raised in Japan, and so we mostly spoke Japanese. Then I had another girlfriend who was a native English speaker. She was an American, so we never spoke Japanese, just for fun sometimes. I send her a text message in Japanese, something cute, right? But my point is that often for me, I also really didn't use Japanese a lot in my day-to-day life, maybe with my neighbors. Of course, I have family in Japan, but I didn't see them very often. They didn't live in Tokyo. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is I can really empathize with students here in the United States who, again, feel like they don't have many opportunities to not only speak English, but also to hear English. So you kind of like what I did, you got to immerse yourself in that spoken language. And that part of that means TV shows, movies, but I really like the idea of podcasts, especially unscripted conversations or unscripted interviews where it is messy, it is chaotic, it's uncomfortable for you to listen to because you don't know what's going on, but you'll get it eventually if you just keep at it. There's actually one more thing I totally forgot, which was cultural information and topical information. Okay, and that is definitely the last point because I'm trying to keep these under 30 minutes or so. I'm also tired. It's Sunday. I'm tired. I was working a little bit this morning. My dog had some problems on Friday, on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, so I had to take her to the vet a few times. That meant that I had to put some of my work off to the weekend. So I'm pretty tired. I want to enjoy the rest of my Sunday. The time is quickly fading, right? Fortunately, Thanksgiving break is coming up, so I'll have a week off soon. I have one more week of work, and then I'll have a week off, and then 3 weeks of work, and then 2 weeks off for the winter break. So if I'm working on the weekend a little bit, it doesn't bother me too much because I know that we'll have quite a long break. But starting in the new year, 2025, I definitely need to be a lot more efficient with my working time. I do not want to be working on weekends. Okay, that's my little rant, right? Let me get back to topical and cultural information. So one more thing about listening to podcasts and watching TV shows, especially like live TV shows, maybe talk shows, game shows, but especially listening to podcasts, interviews, radio programs, and so on, is that you're going to get a lot of cultural and topical information. You're going to get current events, right? What is popular now? What are people talking about, right? What's in the news? I'm just going to give you a recent example. So I have been reviewing my Japanese a little bit. So I've been watching some Japanese comedy shows. I moved back to the United States in 2015, and so that's about almost 10 years where I really have not been keeping up with anything going on in Japan. I basically didn't watch any TV shows from Japan or nothing in Japanese for almost 10 years, right? So when I'm watching these comedy shows from Japan, I'm understanding the vocabulary. That's not really an issue. But then they'll start talking about things like pop culture, other celebrities, some sports people, and I don't know what they're talking about, right? When I lived in Japan, that happened in the beginning. I would watch all these shows and listen to all these podcasts, and I would be like, I understand the words that they're using, but I don't understand what they're talking about. And I'm sure you have this situation a lot too. It even happens when you're older, like now I'm 40, and I listen to kids or teenagers or younger adults. When I hear them talking, I know the words that they're using, but I don't really know what they're talking about sometimes because they're talking about pop culture and celebrities and this sports, this athlete, and this whatever, right? Same could be for politics. If you don't follow politics, you don't know what they're talking about. You understand the vocabulary, but you don't know who these people are. You don't know what these issues are, what these problems are, even when you understand the vocabulary. That's one of the great things about podcasts, especially. You're going to be getting a lot of cultural and topical information, relevant information, current information. What's happening in America these days? What's happening in California? What's happening in Orange County? What's happening in LA County, right? And just for some of you who don't know me or new to the podcast, I'm based in the Southern California area, specifically LA and Orange County. So, we have a lot of students who've lived here for 20 or 30 years, and they don't really know what's happening even in their own area. And so we can solve that issue, but we have to just kind of, again, keep our ears open, getting a lot of information in English, all right? But like I said, when I was in Japan in the very beginning, I was like, I don't know who these celebrities are. I don't know why people are laughing. I understand what they're saying, but I don't know what they're really talking about. Who's this guy? Who's that lady? But I'll tell you what, over time, maybe within a year or so of doing this every day, I started to understand what these cultural references were, who these celebrities were. I started to understand, just the same way that here in the United States, people of my generation will talk about Simpsons, right? And will understand those references and music and the 90s, the 80s, right? Who are these singers and dancers and so on, actors. And I got the same thing in Japan. It just took me some time. But like I said, within a year or so, I understood a lot about these references. And I would even mention them. And I guess my final point is that when you start getting this information, it's going to make it easier to talk to people, because a lot of conversation and communication is not just the vocabulary. It's cultural information, right? We talk about sports. So maybe there's a conversation about the World Series, which happened not too long ago, right? Dodgers and the Yankees. I don't follow baseball, to be honest. So even when people are talking about the World Series of baseball with me, or in a group or in a party, to be honest, I don't really know what they're talking about. Now, I understand baseball perfectly fine. I understand the World Series, but I'm not keeping up with sports. I don't know who this guy is. I don't know who that guy is. I don't know what happened at the last game, right? So even though my English is perfectly fine, it's going to be hard for me to communicate because I don't have that information, that topical, cultural, pop culture, whatever information, right? And so, again, that's a big part of communication. Again, it's not just vocabulary, right? It's cultural and pop cultural information, topical news. I'm sure you've experienced the same thing in your first language or your home country. I want to say maybe one more thing is that, this is what happens for a lot of people who live in the U.S. for a long time, and then they go back and visit their family in Japan or Korea or Mexico or whatever, is that they don't know what's happening in that home country. They've been away for 30 or 40 years. They're not really following it, right? So again, the vocabulary is fine. They're communicating just fine in terms of the language, but it's hard to communicate because they don't know what's happening. So I guess that's my final point. It's 32 minutes, so I want to cut it off here. But as I always say, if you have any suggestions for future topics, if you have any questions for me, please definitely leave it in the comments section, and take a look at the notes as well. And I may provide some links. I'm not sure yet, but definitely interact with me if you have any questions or comments, okay? All right, I hope that was interesting. I'm not sure what I'm going to do for the next episode, number 5, or that would be number 6. But if you have any ideas, please let me know.